Hello again, everybody. I originally gave this talk couple of years ago in Italy, and it was designed primarily for clinicians and doctors on how to break bad news. I realized that I've never actually had any formal training in it, either in medical school or in general ophthalmic practice. It was only when I started being involved in oncology and seeing how my bosses and peers gave the bad news that I started to look at the actual process itself. Breaking bad news is a complex task, and it requires practice and development of skills. As a doctor, we have to respond to the different emotional reactions that patients will have. We have to deal with the stress, discuss decision making, and often have to cope with multiple family members being present. People have all sorts of reactions, and I'm sure some of you will understand when I say that patients experience fear, anger, denial. And for some, these reactions can be completely overwhelming, and patients will almost switch off in front of your eyes. Understandably, people are worried about the risk of spread of the melanoma, any potential side effects of the surgery, maybe the loss of vision, the loss of the eye, and fears about physical disfigurement for the future. And of course, what impact this will have on their life, their work, their relationships, and even their personal independence. So I like to think, why is it important? It's a stressful task for us too. My view is that patients want the truth, usually. And I've always worked to the adage that patients may not remember what you said, but they'll always remember how you said it. So I started delving further into the techniques for breaking bad news. I came across a strategy that was originally devised by an oncologist in Canada called spikes. The S for spikes stands for setting up. I think it starts really with almost a mental rehearsal of what I'm going to say. And for me, this starts even before I have even seen the patient. Before the patient enters the room, I've taken the opportunity to look at the referral letter, look at the details I've been given, any images, ultrasound scans, etc. So I have a rough idea in my mind as to maybe what the diagnosis is likely to be, and therefore the stages that I will give that information back to the patient. We should always try and have a quiet surrounding with some degree of privacy. Something like an interview room is ideal, but it can be difficult, and I'm sure you've all had different experiences. We are limited in the surroundings around us in the clinics, and they're quite busy and bustling. And give the patient an opportunity to have another member of family there, their spouse, etc. And I think you should have space for everyone to sit down because we know it does relax the patient to some degree. It's important to make eye contact. So there is a sort of inherent connection between you and the patient. And as best possible, we try and manage any time constraints and avoid interruptions. So keep the door closed, maybe switch off the mobile phone for those few minutes. P stands for patient's perceptions. And I usually start my consultation once I've seen the information, seen the eye, is often start with a sort of open-ended question to get an idea of how much the patient already knows. What have they been told by their local hospital, the referring doctor, the optometrist? So I usually will start by asking a simple question. What have you been told so far? And I think that allows me to correct any misinformation they might have, and ideally to tailor my own thoughts. Some patients already have quite a bit of information and they've searched online, and some have been told absolutely nothing. And this is the first time that the discussion of melanoma will even have been made. We have to think about patients and wishful thinking, maybe address their unrealistic expectations. And I would say, beware of Dr. Google. You can find all sorts of information which will either comfort you or scare the living daylights out of you. So my adage is, before you tell, ask. The I in spikes is to obtain the patient's invitation. This basically means to find out how much the patient actually wants to know. Not everybody wants every detail about the diagnosis, the prognosis, the treatments, or the illness. It's worth asking patients to say, how much information do you want? Do you want to know all of the details? I use this particularly with difficult conversations such as prognosis and maybe cytogenetic biopsy. And there I use the ask me twice technique. So I will ask the patient, what information do they want to know? Or the patient will ask directly, what's the risk of spread, doctor? I tend to give you a rather wishy-washy answer at first to see if I can gauge how much information you really want to know. And if you ask me again, probably more specifically, then I'll give you a direct answer. I always believe that if a patient asks you a direct question, they deserve a direct answer, even if it will turn out to be unfavorable news. I always offer to answer questions in the future. So this is a great deal of information for a patient, and they can become confused, distressed, and they have to be given the chance to come back to us with further questions and information as they require. And I say to doctors is beware of the relative in the room. I've had rare circumstances where it's obvious the patient doesn't want to know any more information about certain aspects, but their other half were particularly keen to know. And I have to remind them who is the patient, because they may well not want to know the answer to the question that their other half is asking. Then we have to give knowledge